All right, we need to finish these two problems off. What are we going to do on this? So first draw in your parentheses, because you know it's going to factor like that. Put your x's in there. Has to be positive and negative because of that pattern. If I'm multiplying two numbers together, they have to be opposite signs to get a negative number. And then what? The bigger number has to be the positive number. If I put a negative 1 in here and a positive 12 in here, when I multiply those numbers together, I do get negative 12. But they also have to add to give me what? 1. And if I add 12 and negative 1 together, I get what? I get 11. 7 times 6 is not 12. So remember, there is only one way that this can work. You have to find the correct two numbers. And always check, because even if you pick two numbers that seem to work, they might not work for both parts of these problems. So what else multiplies to give me 12? 6 and 2. If I plug a 6 and a 2 in here, that was like slow motion. If I plug a 6 and a 2 in here, will I add those together and get a positive 1? Negative 3 and positive 4. If I multiply those together, I do get negative 12. If I add those two numbers together, positive 4 and negative 3, do I get positive 1? Yes, those are the two numbers. So positive 4 and negative 3, that's the answer. Now on that last one, same way. Set up your parentheses. Put your variable in there. What are my signs going to have to be? Positive and negative again, because I'm multiplying two numbers together to get a negative result. So I have to have a plus and a minus. Now, which one's going to be bigger, the positive one or the negative one? The bigger one has to be negative, because I'm going to combine those and wind up with a negative result when I add them together. 6 and 4 is 24. If I make this a negative 6 and a positive 4, when I add those together, I get my negative 2. So this has to be a 4, and this has to be the negative 6. There's your answer. So remember those patterns. If both signs are plus, then it's just going to be plus plus. If both signs are negative, then it's going to be minus plus, and the bigger number is negative. If the last number is positive, then both numbers have to have the same sign. If this front number is negative, then both numbers have to be negative. If we have a negative number here and a positive here, then we have to have opposite signs. But then the bigger number has to be positive to wind up adding those things together and getting a positive result. All right, a couple more problems to work on here. As usual, at the end of the section, we talk about story type problems. We have the area of a rectangle is given by the trinomial that. What are the possible dimensions of the rectangle? And then it says use factoring. So they're giving you a clue here. It says the area of a rectangle is given by. What should I do first, probably? Anytime I see the area of a rectangle, or the circumference of a circle, or the height of a triangle, or what should I do? Draw what? Draw a picture. What should I draw here? I'll draw a rectangle. Maybe it'll help me in this case, maybe it won't, but most of the time drawing a picture definitely helps. Now it says the area of a rectangle. Well, how do I find the area of a rectangle? Length times width, or base times height. That's right. So if I knew this dimension and this dimension, I could multiply them together to get the area, right? So they give me the area. It says the area is this. How did they get that? They multiplied the two dimensions together. That's right. So what I need to do is undo that multiplication so that I can find out what these two dimensions here were. Maybe you didn't know that until you drew the picture. I don't know. So here's my trinomial. I need to split that into two things being multiplied together. So that means I need to factor. Okay? So I can set up my parentheses like I've been doing. Then what? X and X. Opposite signs because of that negative sign right there. Positive 5 and negative 7 because they have to have a larger number that's negative so that they add together to give you that negative middle term. Check your numbers. 5 times negative 7 is negative 35. 5 plus negative 7 is negative 2. So this seems to be the right answer. Which of these dimensions is longer? This one is. Because if x is just any number, I'm adding some stuff to x here, but I'm taking some stuff away from x here, which makes this number as a whole bigger than this number. So if I was labeling the dimensions on this figure, where would I put the x plus 5? On the bottom. That's like the length, and then the width would be x minus 7. To find the area of a rectangle, you do length times width. Length times width. Length times width. Multiply those together and you get that, which they told me was the area. So that's what the problem is. They give you this clue here, use factoring to come up with the answer. Okay? You can do those problems, they just look different. You can also do a problem like this. Just looks different. So, I'm going to factor this. X and X, because when I FOIL my first terms together, x times x gives me that first term, x squared. I can use the rules of my signs. I have a minus sign sitting here. The only way that can happen is if I have a plus and a minus. And now my two numbers that I put here and here have to multiply together to give me negative 55y squared. They have to add together to give me a positive 6xy, which means that the bigger number has to be what? Positive. So whatever the bigger number is that I pick, it has to go here. The smaller number is going to go here. What times what gives me negative 55y squared? 11y and negative 5y. If I put an 11y there and a negative 5y there, I take my two numbers and I multiply them together, and it gives me negative 55y squared. I take the numbers themselves, 11 and negative 5, and I add them together, and I get positive 6. But where does this x come from? Yeah, as you FOIL, so let's just FOIL this back out. We do have the x times x, which is x squared. But then the O is the x times the negative 5y, which is negative 5xy. And then the I is 11y times x, which is positive 11xy. Those are like terms, they'll combine to give me that 6xy. And then, of course, the minus 55y squared. So you can do problems like this, too. They just take slightly more thought. You're still going to use the same sign pattern for in the middle in these binomials. You're still going to use the same number pattern. They have to multiply to give you that number and add to give you that number. But that's going to change, and you're going to have a variable on the end as well. FOIL these back out to make sure that you're doing them correctly. But you can do them. So that's the whole section right there. And then you can do the whole assignment now. You could before, actually. But now officially you can't.